Hello, this is Nice Wander of the NOWMAN Show, and I'm here at Occidental College with Professor Richard Wolff of New School University in Manhattan. Thank you for being on the NOWMAN Show, Professor.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I have a couple questions for you. First of all, we just heard a great talk called Imagining Alternatives and Progressive Economics and Social Movements. First of all, what is the history of socialism in the United States?
The history of socialism in this country is not so different from the history elsewhere. Basically, since capitalism arose as a system and it came to the United States with the colonists who took over this country from the Native Americans, capitalism has been the way that the system organized itself, employers and employees. And like all systems, capitalism in the United States and elsewhere has had the people who love it and the people who don't, the people who think it's a great achievement and the people who think we can and should do better. The folks who think we can and should do better, over time, adopted a name for themselves, and the name was socialists. Their idea was capitalism is a system set up for a minority of people, the few who own the factories, the offices, the stores, who are in a position to decide what gets produced and what gets done with the profits. And they run the system to benefit themselves. And the critics said, yeah, but that's the problem. The system benefits you because you run it, but we, who are the majority and in whose name a revolution in America against Britain was run, we are being left out. So we want the whole society to benefit, not just you, and so they took the name socialists. They did it in Europe, they did it here. And so the irony of it is that socialism is capitalism's shadow. You can't get rid of your shadow, and capitalism can never get rid of socialism, because socialism is the name for the people who are critics. And you can imagine that the system will one day be so wonderful that it will have no critics. But that's never happened in the history of the human race, and it's really a long shot this time. So socialists have been up and down. They've been big with lots of people thinking it. Other times they've been small. What you can say is the idea that you could get beyond it, that you could live in a capitalism that had no socialism, that's we've never seen. And the irony of ironies is that now, after a Cold War period since Second World War, when it was almost taboo to say socialism, here it comes once again, proving itself always there as it comes roaring back, first in the Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011, and now in the candidacy of Bernie Sanders, as if to tell the world, I told you so, socialism isn't going away, you haven't erased it, because it's the shadow, it's the criticism. And eventually, my guess is that the critics will so outnumber the defenders that the system will dissolve. Because I think that's what happened in the Soviet Union in 1989, that the critics were so numerous, were so determined, that it just fell apart. It was a dissolution, and the notion that it can only happen there and can't happen here is the worst kind of wishful thinking.
And we have, as you mentioned, capitalists dominating the system, essentially. So it's not the ism, it's the people behind it dominating the system. So how do capitalists who've been set in their ways now, we're not just talking about a couple generations, we're talking, 200 some years. How would capitalists evolve into this new system?
Well, my guess is they wouldn't evolve. That is, some would find this perfectly reasonable. I actually know of quite a few cases in the United States over the last 20 years when capitalists who built up a very successful business came to the end of their lives, and their children weren't interested in carrying on this business. So they didn't know what to do. They could close the business, but they didn't want to do that because it's a lifetime's work. They built up this business, they have their employees, they care about them, they're decent people. So they didn't want to close the business, and they didn't want to sell it to some faceless monster corporation, because who knows what they will do with the business and the property. So they didn't know what to do, and then we came along and we said, there is another solution. You could sell it to the workers, convert it into a collective activity of these working people. It's a new way of doing business, but it keeps their jobs, it keeps their communities, it is an exciting new way to live your life, your work life. Why don't you give it a shot? And I think that you'll be surprised that there is a significant number of capitalists who will find their way to this, not as something imposed on them, but something that they choose. But I see your point. There will be capitalists who hate it, who want to block it, who want to stop it. But let me go back to the example of the Soviet Union. Most people agree that in the decades before the collapse of the Soviet Union, you had a powerful central government with an elaborate secret police, with an elaborate system of controlling the population. Most Americans thought it was a dictatorship of one kind or another. They were tough. They could control the opposition. Yeah, and then they couldn't. Then despite all of their apparatus and all their secret police, the existing regime fell apart. The Soviet Union came to an end. I understand that there are powerful forces in the capitalist sector, in the government, that would want to stop this. But the fact that they have a lot of resources and the fact that they want to stop it is no more a guarantee that they'll be able to do that than it proved to be for the people who ran the Soviet Union. So I think we ought to take our hats off for a minute and understand every economic system in the history of the world has been born, has developed, and then has passed away. Capitalism was born in England in the 18th century, 17th century, has spread all over the world, changed in the process. It's now everywhere, but the question is it now passing away? The notion that capitalism, unlike any other system, will live forever and not pass away, yeah. I think the burden of that, proof of that, is on the people who believe it, not those of us who find it unbelievable.
Well, you mentioned in your talk about even Plato and Aristotle did not like markets, and markets is what capitalism is really all about, correct?
I've been teaching a course. I taught it at Yale, I taught it at the University of Massachusetts, I've taught it in New York. It's called The History of Economics Thought. It's one of the standard courses that students in economics are required to take, so they get a sense of how their discipline developed. And I always begin the course by assigning readings from Plato and Aristotle, just to show, A, that they had very good questions they asked about economics, good answers that they gave, and I must admit I want them to see that both Plato and Aristotle thought markets were a terrible institution because they set everybody against everybody else. Everybody is always trying to give as little as possible to get in exchange as much as possible. This puts you in an adversarial, ugly relationship with everybody. How are you going to have friendships? How are you going to have love relationships when they're always undercut and contradicted by the economic way you do your transactions that make your life better? And another thing both Plato and Aristotle hated was that markets tend to favor those who have money. That's what a market is. The more money you have, yes, the more you get. If there's scarce items, the one with more money offers to pay more, which the one with less can't afford. So what markets do is they pander to the rich. And in the minds of Plato and Aristotle, this is not a good arrangement for social cohesion, for community solidarity, because this favoritism will develop a polarity between rich and poor, and that is dynamite dangerous for a community to allow that to go on. And boy, do we live in a capitalism today which has let that process go on farther than has been done for a long time, and it's equally scary to people now on all sides of the political divide, because there's this deep sense that this level of inequality is social dynamite.
And with Oxfam statistics, 62 billionaires on the planet have as much wealth as half the lower half of the population. So, Professor Wolff, thank you so much for being on the NOWMAN Show. Give us some information of where people can learn more about what you're doing.
Yeah, if you like the materials that we do, the radio program Economic Update that we do, then please visit our websites. They're open 24/7, no charge whatsoever. The two of them are rdwolff with 2 Fs.com, that's me, and the other one is called Democracy at Work, all one word, democracyatwork.info, I-N-F-O.
Fantastic. Professor Wolff, thank you very much for being on the NOWMAN Show.
Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. This is Nice Wonder. Until next time,